We're getting there. Do you want to introduce Olympus?
Kyle's got beer over there. Kyle's got beer.
You're welcome, dead guys.
Thanks.
So thank you all for coming tonight for our meetup. We have here a fireside conversation with Hashgraph to talk about corporate governance and consensus building. This event was hosted by Reed Smith, by Herb Kozlov. Here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our incredibly gracious hosts and excellent law firm who helps me out on all our crypto-related transactions. And the other host tonight is Olympus Labs, and we're going to have the CEO of Olympus Labs say hello and introduce himself and the company briefly.
Thank you so much for the introduction.
Pleasure.
Hey guys, my name is Kai. I'm the CEO, co-founder, and founder of Olympus Labs. So what we do is we're creating a financial protocol for crypto-based financial products. So if you guys know ERC20, the standard for creating tokens, we're kind of doing something similar, except where this standard would be for creating financial products such as ETFs, options, futures, indexes, etc. And one of the things that we're creating that I'm really excited about is something called leverage without margin. So we're turning the pricing model for derivatives on its head. So instead of having to borrow against or borrow money to leverage up and essentially risk margin calls, etc., we're using the smart contract model to really get rid of all of that, cutting out having to borrow money to do all that stuff. But this is my so I grew up in New York actually, but this is my first time back in a year, and I've been been on the road recently. So really excited to be back, to be back in the Big Apple, and I'm really excited to be to have this chat with Hashgraph, with to be in this space. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you for hosting. And before we get to the fireside conversation, we're lucky to have with us tonight Gil Pacina, who is the founder of Flight VC and a leader in the venture capital world, and now a leader in the blockchain and DLT world.
All right. Sorry, I'm in town from San Francisco, and Lou asked me to come by and just say hi for a couple of minutes. I'm an angel in 200 or 300 startups and a bunch of crypto things, and more recently a founder of Prize, which is a crypto fundraising tool that a bunch of folks are using. What I find most interesting, frankly, about Hashgraph is New York has been the center of gravity for a lot of the crypto trading, platforms for trading, platforms for sort of algo trading, hedge funds. But until recently, there haven't been that many sort of technologically forward-thinking crypto companies. And Hashgraph, from my perspective, having met with the team, is really one of the more interesting technical projects that I've seen in a long time. There's a lot of financial products, there's a lot of apps, but sort of a core underlying protocol that I think could be very interesting. And so it's really sort of exciting to see them being based here in New York and bringing some sort of leading edge engineering to the New York community. So with that, I'll let you guys do the important stuff.
Okay, let's bounce around. Hello? Ooh, that's scary. So welcome. My name is James Haft, partner with Lou, and we're really pleased to be here tonight with the gentleman from Hashgraph. We're here with Jordan Freed, who's a director and head of business development, and Tom Trowbridge. Speak louder.
Yeah, it's closer. Keep it closer.
All right. Thomas Trowbridge, who is also an executive director and who focuses on corporate governance and their new effort to go into a public ledger. So let's start with Jordan. What is Hashgraph?
Cool. I'll give some quick background on myself before, but I found Hashgraph by way of investment in a company called Swirlds, which is the company behind the intellectual property of the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. So Tom and I are both angels in the project, and the project was started by a professor named Dr. Lehman Baird. My focus at the project is head of business development. I sort of adopted that role after making an investment. The technology, for me, was the most groundbreaking thing I have had the chance to be part of. So previously, I ran a company called Buffered VPN, buffered.com, which was just a personal VPN service that was based in Budapest, Hungary, where I was for the past 6 years. And my intro into blockchain was when all of our customers started demanding Bitcoin as a payment method. The VPNs are, anonymity is a big part of that. So I said, what is Bitcoin? And we ended up integrating BitPay and playing around with it. And I got more and more interested over time. Now I'm in the space full time. I'll let Tom introduce himself quickly too.
Sure. Yeah, I found out, as Jordan said, came across the investment or came across the company via investment. I was looking at another deal, and a friend who I knew was very knowledgeable in the space said he discovered something pretty groundbreaking and revolutionary. And would I help him look at it? We looked at it, tried to poke holes in it, weren't able to do so, introduced it to more and more people, keeping, with an attempt to find what we were missing, and we still are looking. So, we haven't found what we're missing yet, and the promise seems to be as big as we initially thought. And then as I got closer to the company, like Jordan, realized there was value I could add. And so I'm focused more on the potential launch of a public ledger and governance that will be related to that, and financing which will be related to that. And I guess one element, just to clarify nomenclature here, which Jordan mentioned initially, Swirlds is the owner of the IP. If you go to the website, swirlds.com, you can learn, and maybe you already have done that, but that's where the bios of the founders, Lehman Baird and Mance Harmon, are. There's an SDK you can download and play with, and there's the white paper, so all the information is there. Swirlds is the name of that entity. Hashgraph is the name of the underlying technology. And it's the underlying technology which we're talking about here, but I want to clarify, Hashgraph is not the name of any company, even though it may seem that way in some of the discussions. So as long as just want to clarify that also.
So okay, I'm an art history major. Can you explain to me in terms I can understand what is Hashgraph?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. So literally, Hashgraph is a directed acyclic graph. It's not blockchain. So blockchain, when we talk about blockchain, it's a chain of blocks physically in the way that data structure is set up. Hashgraph is a graph of cryptographic hashes. So it's not blockchain, but it's a simple and elegant algorithm that can help achieve consensus in a distributed architecture. This came from Dr. Lehman Baird spending, I think it was close to 5 years trying to find an alternative to Nakamoto consensus. And what he's done here is, frankly, a breakthrough in computer science, which is we can, in our system, and maybe I should go through to really explain Hashgraph, I should go through some of the other systems out there. When I talk about us being a consensus mechanism different from what else is out there, I'm referring to proof of work, where you've got these expensive mining rigs. I'm talking about economy-based systems like EOS and Tezos and Paxos. I'm talking about leader-based systems where you've got a central leader or a round robin of a node determining order of transactions or determining when consensus is achieved. A Hashgraph comes from a 30-year-old group of consensus algorithms called voting-based systems. What is new here is that we've removed the need to submit a vote. Which sounds very weird, but we call it virtual voting, which is gossip about gossip, and that's what the IP is really surrounding here. So when you look at it, where current blockchain is today, proof of work being 7 transactions per second, leader-based systems getting you maybe hundreds of transactions per second. These all have vulnerabilities. They have flaws in them. None of them can claim asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant. They're not DDoS resilient in many cases. If you send a bunch of data packets at a leader-based system, you will probably succeed in taking that system down. Hashgraph is asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant. That's really the gold standard in enterprise or bank grade security. And we're able to do today hundreds of thousands of transactions per second without any sharding. So you start sharding that network and perhaps you could be doing millions of transactions per second. Because of this and because of our property of fairness, we do something that no one else does at the moment, which is median timestamping, so we can achieve a total order of transactions. You're talking about a new consensus mechanism that does everything that blockchain does today, but much more, where it's a bigger circle, where if blockchain is a circle here and you've got Hashgraph, we do what blockchain does, but we take it a step further. So not only are we a better ledger, we are we open up entirely new use cases by both the property of fairness and by the transactional throughput. Those properties can be markets and games and other really interesting and unique things, but sorry for the long-winded overview. That is Hashgraph in a nutshell.
And just to build on that and explain some of those properties in detail, or a little bit more specific with regard to one, Jordan talked about the speed, multiple hundreds of thousands a second. How do we achieve that? That's achieved by sending the absolute minimum amount of data we think necessary to articulate or to prove a transaction has happened. That amount of data is about 100 bytes. And so that's, we think, the absolute minimum amount of data necessary. So speed is not determined by the actual system. It's really determined by bandwidth and CPU power. And so just to be totally clear, when you're looking at speeds, when this is tested broadly, speed will vary, but it's going to vary not based on the algorithm. It's going to vary based on the CPU you're using, the bandwidth, any delays you're having in the network. That is really the limit, the bandwidth limit, and broadband limit is what determines this. The other element, which I think is relevant here, is because it uses so little bandwidth and so little computing power, transactions cost a minuscule fraction of what Bitcoin or Ethereum or other types of transactions cost. And so to put that in perspective, Ethereum transaction costs are in the pennies, I believe. We think our transaction costs will be in the millionths of a penny. And so that, Jordan mentioned other use cases which open up. When you think about microtransactions, you think about the uses, and which we might not even be able to conceptualize, of what you can do when you can pay people in thousands of pennies for different types of transactions. So use cases start to come to mind that are hard to even think about right here, right now. So those are a couple kind of additions to it.
So what's the history of the company? How did, in terms of becoming commercial and starting to interact with customers and outsiders?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the sort of, I guess, coming out of the stealth moment was when Dr. Lehman Baird presented the consensus algorithm. There's a video on YouTube at the the Identity Summit put on by Ping Identity. If you just look at CIS 2016, so this was in the summer of last year, I think in June, where Mance Harmon, our CEO, and Dr. Baird both presented the what they thought were the implications of something like this. There's also, for any developers in the audience today, there's a great video on developing for Hashgraph. Since then, some pretty big things have happened. Our challenge as a company is that the space is growing so quickly. We're attempting to go from an obscure consensus mechanism to trying to be up against some of the other consensus mechanisms in the market that we're all familiar with. So we're happy to, and this was announced by a partner, CU Ledger, who chose the Hashgraph consensus algorithm over IBM Hyperledger for what will be the first POC that will be launched at the beginning of next year, which is a network by 6,000 credit unions, part of a consortium. This is the CU Ledger entity, that are essentially trying to do what R3 Corda does for the banks, but to do that for the credit union industry. So we're really proud of that one. I can't really say too much more on we've got many outgoing POCs now with some of the largest companies in the world. Many of the logos are in your wallet, and you probably use some of these brands. So our focus as a company, as Swirlds, because you asked about our history, is that we go in enterprises and try to build private permission-based networks to take the technology stack, which isn't theoretical. It's not a white white paper. I want to make that distinction here. As Tom mentioned, it's a working SDK that you can develop on. And we go into blockchain groups or go into corporations that have fintech departments and show them how to adopt the technology and how to build POCs on it. So we are very much at the let's gain adoption, let's build developer evangelism, which is really what I call myself, doing business development. And I think that when these companies are ready, they will come out with their own press releases that they're using this. I'm not going to call them out here now.
So there's a current trend right now of companies actually trying to have real businesses before they go to ICO and tokenize. And it sounds like you guys are going down that trend as well. What's the biggest challenge to moving from having a real company with real customers to then trying to move into the next phase of being public and funding in a transparent, open way?
Yeah, great question.
I mean, I'm not sure how to address that. Let's just say this, we haven't tried to do it any other way. So I can't tell you this is easier or harder than doing it a different way. I think I will just say philosophically, though, the more you have, the more people can attempt to poke holes at and the more flaws people can try to find. If you just have a white paper, it's an idea, everyone can project on that idea whatever they want, and the sky is the limit for that idea. As soon as something is actually tangible and deployed, even if there's one little flaw, someone's going to find it and someone's going to focus on it. And so I guess that is just kind of just a philosophical challenge of having something real and developed that people versus just a concept. So that's perhaps one area.
Yeah, the other thing I'd jump on here is that we're bootstrapped in the sense that we've not really raised anything more than a seed round that's public. There's information. We had a couple really great partners there, NEA being the biggest, but we've gotten to this incredible point where the technology exists today. It's out there. The biggest challenge is adoption. The biggest challenge is you've got a lot of other technologies out there that you can build on that have been more tested, and we're the new kids on the block. So how do you go from obscurity to something that people trust and want to deploy in their enterprise? How we address that and what I think we do really well is that we can work with the other technologies out there, and I want that to be more known. You can build on Solidity today and have Hashgraph be the consensus mechanism if you had an Ethereum virtual machine to compile that application. You could, if you wanted to, use Hyperledger's SDK and build a business application, a vertical business application that solves a problem, and have Hashgraph be the consensus mechanism. So my point really is that we are the very bottom of the stack. We are the trust layer in a private permissioned environment, and our public ledger, while there's little we can say on it, we hope will also be the trust layer that sits on top of TCP/IP and that many people would build on.
And are you focused on identity management?
The great question. Our Mance Harmon and Dr. Baird have started two companies previously in the identity space. Both were acquired, and they're both they would self-proclaim themselves to be Identirate, and that they came from Ping Identity. Ping Identity was actually first money into Swirlds. Personally, we're very big believers in self-sovereign identity. I think if anyone here has been exposed by something like Equifax or some of the other things, I know I was. And I had my identity stolen. Actually, just my profile being in the company or just being vocal in crypto on LinkedIn or on Twitter led me to be hacked, and someone was impersonating me and stealing crypto. So self-sovereign identity is something we very much as a company believe in, and we are starting to see more and more POC starting to address this using our technology, which we're proud of.
And to move towards corporate governance and consensus gathering, how do you see the landscape, and where do you see that it fits in the development of the distributed ledger and the decentralized economy?
I guess there's multiple ways to address corporate governance with regard to either blockchain or distributed ledger technology, and I think one is the corporate governance of a particular technology and chain or ledger. So that's sort of one area. The other is, how does the technology assist corporate governance initiatives in other enterprises? And so those are kind of two distinct areas, I think. And with regard to the first, we see, blockchain is almost a corporate governance case study of what can go wrong. given all of the forks that we continue to see with Bitcoin and potentially with other technologies as well. And so the mere fact you have competing developer groups and competing incentives and visions of where things should go show there is some corporate governance need in that vertical. I mean, and just you take a step back, to the extent forks continue to happen, it hasn't jeopardized Bitcoin's adoption. We know from the price today that people are buying it, like it's going out of style. At some point, those forks could create a problem and could slow adoption. And I think that is a real risk with regard to anything in the distributed ledger technology or blockchain world. You go to other systems that have consensus or that have governance done by perhaps a nonprofit or a small group of people. You also have corporate governance issues due to concentration. We think we have another method for corporate governance within our distributed ledger, but we haven't articulated and publicly discussed what that is. The other element I'll mention with regard to corporate governance, there are a lot of use cases where governance can be challenged due to human error, and smart contract built on top of distributed ledger technology can really aid in eliminating human error issues. And so I think of regulatory regimes that require data to be stored for a certain amount of time and then permanently deleted and have proof of that deletion. Smart contracts written on blockchain or distributed ledger technology can provide verification of those processes being followed through in a way that is not error prone and is verifiable. So I think those are sort of two channels to go down.
You guys have been, I don't know if it's luck or hard work, but have risen to the top of the pile in terms of attention over the past month or so. How did that happen? And is it something which is helping or hindering your efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. It wasn't intentional. As Tom already mentioned, we've focused from day one only on the technology, which is why we both love this from an investment standpoint, and that it was unlike anything else in the space. It didn't reek of an ICO or a pump and dump sort of scheme. It was two of the most genuine people you'd ever meet who have been business partners for close to 25 years, who are essentially family to each other, who have put together one of the most remarkable advances in computer science, frankly. I don't yet think we can all appreciate that what we have here is something that solves the problem of distributed consensus. It solves the double spending problem. It took time. This isn't an overnight thing. A very bold, sensationalist headline definitely helped. Some that we had nothing to do with that. There was a publication that wrote something that claimed that blockchain was obsolete. We didn't ask for that sort of coverage. Someone made that claim. We're not making that claim. In fact, we don't think blockchain is obsolete. There's probably a lot of good things that you would still do with it, and we'd like to coexist in the space. A lot of credit goes to a bunch of people who are involved internally, who deal with press and PR and marketing, but also just our protocol engineers and Dr. Baird himself. The technology speaks for itself, and it deserves the recognition. I'd be remiss to say that I think the man should be up for a Turing Award at some point in the future.
And I would add that if you think there's press now, there's nothing compared to what could happen down the road once we make some more public releases and announcements. So I think we're at the very early days of widespread consciousness about Hashgraph and what we're capable of and where we're going.
So in terms of, you're saying that interoperability will be important and that you think you're going to be part of the landscape, right? Part of the tapestry. How does that interoperability evolve? Is it through users and demand, or is it through the companies themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that comes from there's already interoperability in that being bottom of the stack has the benefit of you can build your vertical business application in C or Java, or you could build it in any language you choose, whether that be Solidity or Hyperledger or Microsoft Cocoa framework, right? The fact that on the application layer we can be tech agnostic while encouraging adoption of our consensus mechanism, this is an alternative to proof of work. So when you look at something just was circulating on the web not too long ago over Thanksgiving, that some European countries exert or use less electricity than Bitcoin mining operations, which is remarkable. If we just for 1 second think about what that would mean if we truly got widespread adoption of Bitcoin. There's claims that Bitcoin could become the shadow currency of Venezuela, and we reject those claims, and that the transactional throughput is very limited there. But in terms of how we would get to a place where we can coexist, I think there's still a great use of Ethereum, of Solidity. I'll say that publicly. I've invested in Ethereum. I think that they've done a great job disrupting venture capitalism. Venture capitalism has really morphed into crypto capitalism, and a really great dev team with a really great business plan, or white paper as it's now called, can raise a ton of money through an ERC20 token. It's a phenomenal innovation. We'd like to be part of that, but from the stack layer, from build your Solidity application, but use the Hashgraph consensus mechanism. It's better than Casper. It's better than proof of work. It's certainly better than economy or leader-based systems.
What are the limits of the Gossip platform?
I'm going to make the claim that there are no limits to it. It's really solved the problem of how do we achieve consensus in a distributed architecture while being able to scale with remarkable transactional throughput with the strongest form of security in the marketplace. So I can take no credit for this. Dr. Baird he's sort of one of those people who you meet, and your life will really never be the same after that. He obsesses over problems. This one was a 5-year obsession, and what he's achieved, and let's be honest, during those 5 years he gave up many times, but we're here today talking about the breakthrough in that we can do 300,000 transactions per second without any sharding. I don't know anyone else who can make a claim like that without sharding. There's a couple people in Sydney, Australia who think they have something like that, but it's an entirely sharded network. They're sacrificing security. We don't have that with Gossip about Gossip.
Interesting. So I was hoping to bring this to questions and answers, just so I could keep people awake in the audience. One second. I wanted to say that I was remiss in not mentioning Kari Larson, who is the head of the crypto fintech practice here at Reed Smith, and she's here. And that there's drinks and food for afterwards. They reset the bar for us. So afterwards, we could all meet at the bar. Okay. Young lady over here. We have mics, actually.
Thank you. Really interesting comments. I'm excited to learn more. I'm a developer in a different space, kind of just getting interested. Can you talk more about how you're able to use so little data to create, I don't know what the right terminology is, have a consensus around a transaction. The second part of my question is around sustainability, and if that's something that you guys are thinking about, and is that important to you as a company or as a technology?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So to do that, let me talk about how Gossip about Gossip works. And I think that will help. What we're really doing is building a graph of cryptographic hashes. And if you visualize the graph as different nodes in a network, you have A, B, C, D, being Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave. What we're doing is Alice is gossiping to Bob about what she knows that Bob doesn't know about what Dave and Carol know. So what we're doing is we're passing an event. An event in Hashgraph is a block in blockchain. And what we're doing is we're passing an event that stores a timestamp, a transactional payload, and 2 cryptographic hashes. One is your digital signature. The other is who you talked to last. So by building a graph, a picture of who everyone talked to and when, we can see all noise or all conversation, all transactions, all gossip on the network, and we know everything everyone else on the network knows. So you being Alice, you know what Carol and Dave and what Bob know, because you can see you're building a graph in your memory of what everybody else on the network knows. Thus, you already know what Carol and Dave would have voted. This is the classic Byzantine generals problem. If we're both generals in the Byzantine army and at sunrise we both need to invade, if I invade and you don't, I die. If you invade and I don't, you die. How do we solve this collective action problem in this distributed architecture? So what the vote is essentially a yes or a no. This is why it's called virtual voting. And what you're really just communicating is the picture of the hash graph and who's talked to last. So we remove the need to vote because you already know what every other node on the network would have voted, and thus we're just communicating who talked to who when with a timestamp and with a small transactional payload. Hashgraph, as Tom mentioned, is as fast as you'd like it to be depending on the payload of what's being communicated, right? So in different applications, in an MMORPG like World of Warcraft, you don't need to know everything happening in the entire world. You could know what's just happening in a single shard in the world you're playing in, not in the entire game. This will still help you achieve consensus. Doing it faster, you could shard for that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also just to add one little piece to that, because it's known as virtual voting, when that picture of the graph goes to Alice or Bob, say it goes to Bob, he knows what Alice knows, so he votes for Alice. And he votes in place of Alice. He knows what Alice's consensus is, and it's his consensus as well. But that means he also doesn't have to send something back. And so you actually have only one way transactions necessary, which right away cuts things in half to begin with. And also, they're sharing the most recent graphs. They're also not transmitting the whole history of transactions as well. And so, into your second part of your question was around sustainability, and I think that being so data light makes this a far greener solution than the other technologies out there, which is something that we're proud of. And there are certain companies who actually are pursuing more extensive discussions with us, partly for that reason.
The other thing to point out is we don't push the sustainability thing enough, but inherently a mobile device has the computing power necessary to be a node on a hashgraph network. That's remarkable considering that people are building and buying, selling out NVIDIA and AMD computer processors that suck electricity and that drain our Earth's resources. So from that standpoint, you charge your cell phone, it connects to a TCP/IP network, either via 4G or LTE or Wi-Fi, and you're a node on a hashgraph network. That's pretty remarkable.
That's cool.
Cool. Thank you. Really enjoyed the talk, guys. Thank you so much. One question is, how do you incentivize the nodes to reach consensus in Hashgraph?
Well, the way we're talking obviously on a public network here. So nodes will be compensated based on the amount of bandwidth and computing power they use. And so it is not a race like it is in a typical mining operation, but rather a predictable revenue stream based purely on the number of transactions in the network, and then your share based on the amount of bandwidth and computing power you are contributing to generating and solving consensus. So it is going to be a very predictable revenue stream. Dr. Lehman Baird has a vision that anyone will be able to attach their computer to the network, and the college kid will be able to pay for car payments via by renting out effectively the spare computing power in their laptop. We'll see if we get to that place, but that's the idea.
And just to point out, the distinction is what you're asking about is effectively the public ledger. In a private permission network, you're essentially standing up Amazon Web Services instances or DigitalOcean instances, and then running the network administrator would ensure that all the nodes are gossiping and being utilized to the fullest. On a public ledger, as Tom mentioned, that's the incentive structure.
When you ask the question, introduce yourself and give one sentence blurb on who you are.
Thanks a lot for coming in. A great presentation. I'm Brian. I got into cryptocurrency this year, and I was part of a sell-side research shop. We sold crypto research to institutional investors. Fascinating consensus protocol. So you guys say you have a SDK out. So I'm wondering where are you guys in the development timeline? Is it use case ready. And I admire the fact that you're not. I think you said you're not going to have a token. That's very admirable. Is there any plans for that in the future?
Yeah, let's clarify something. So the public ledger would probably come with an associated cryptocurrency in the future.
Okay.
We did not lead with that for the first 2 years of the company's history. We are leading with a private permission-based environment. To answer the first part of your question, where we're at with that, the SDK is in a beta version. You can download it in a sandbox environment. We took it to the TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon, and we had, I think, 24 dev teams building on it. We gave a prize to someone that built a Hashgraph fair auction ledger that used a hyphenate API, which is an SMS API, and that allowed people in a distributed network to submit bids via SMS in a Sotheby's-like auction, to submit bids for a charity auction where Hashgraph would decide who came first, who won that auction, what bid came in at what time. We also had someone build a fully built MMORPG. So people are developing on Hashgraph today. The SDK is online. You can download it. To deploy a public application does require a license. To do it in a business, a private permissioned environment, a license will not be required on a public ledger. You'd simply you'd pay for your usage. You'd pay for API-like calls, similar to how you'd pay for bandwidth in Amazon Web Services, or for any other API. You pay as you play. So that is, there's a ton of stuff that's built. It's on our website. I don't want to ramble too much on it, but it's anything from an MMORPG to an auction to a direct store delivery applications for internal FMCG companies. Lots of cool stuff now. So beta stage, the alpha version of our the finished version of our SDK should probably be released at the beginning of Q1 2018.
And are you talking about the rollout of the public ledger yet in terms of timing?
We're not. I mean, it's definitely at some point next year, we hope to be able to announce a more specific timing with regard to that. And also, just to echo George's point, we couldn't have a public ledger without an associated currency or token. So you would need to have that in order for it to be to operate. But at some point next year, look for an announcement from us on it.
Yeah. How much more time do we have left for questions?
I think 5 more minutes.
Okay. We probably have time for maybe like 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jonathan, studying CS at Columbia right now, and I'm actually a dev, and I've been working with the SDK for a while now, and pretty active on the Telegram community too. And there's 2 problems that me and other people who've been working with SDK, we can't really seem to figure out, and we would like to hear your take on this, how you guys propose to solve this. The first one is that throughput drops significantly once you go past 1,000 nodes pre-sharding, is what we've seen. And then the second one is you need to know all the other nodes because it's a permissioned network, because otherwise you don't know who to randomly ping. So can you guys explain how you guys propose to resolve those 2 solutions to get a public ledger? Thanks.
On the first point, with the 1,000 nodes, the plan for V2 is to shard the network so that every 1,000 nodes you have a shard. And so I think Lehman has recognized that issue and thinks that per 1,000 nodes we'll be able to shard it, and that will be possible in version 2 for sure. With regard to the what was the second?
Yeah, can you repeat the second part of the question? Being the
know the nodes.
Yeah.
Like Bitcoin, where you can just join and just keep guessing numbers to the hash. You need to actually know exactly who's online to know who to randomly.
Yeah, great question. So as you also mentioned in your question, the SDK was built for private permissioned usage. We take the SDK into not just a hackathon environment, but into a fintech department at a Fortune 500 company and show them the SDK to a network administrator that would be deploying a private permission-based network. On a public ledger, the nodes, it's very important because the best you can do in a distributed architecture is 1/3 + 1. On the public ledger, over time, more and more people will be able to join. But who manages nodes initially? It's very important that you could compromise a network if you could successfully compromise a third plus one of all the nodes. So yes, you will have to be identified as a node on the network and join that network. Yes, the vision is for, as Tom echoed, of Dr. Baird's vision was that any kid could, in his bedroom, host a node and put it online. And I think we'll get to that vision. It will just take a lot. You'll see a lot more in what else is coming out in version 1 of the SDK. It has to deal with reconnectivity of nodes right now. Again, this was very much built for private permissioned environments, and I think you'll see a lot more geared towards a public ledger.
Hi, my name is Bram Frankel. I'm an e-commerce entrepreneur, so I'm fairly new to these technologies. I'm wondering if you could comment on, you talked about one of the key benefits of Hashgraph is the scalability relative to some of the other distributed ledger technologies. I was wondering if you could comment on the comparison to IOTA's Tangle in terms of their scalability, and obviously it's a DAG, but it's coming at it from a slightly different perspective. And I'm wondering if you see them as a competitor and how you would compare and contrast with them.
Yeah, good question. I'm not as intimately familiar with IOTA as I am other projects in the space. I know they're also a DAG. I know that they're also very focused on the Internet of Things and microtransactions. I stand by that Hashgraph would be better for that, and that what I do know of IOTA, they've since corrected, so I don't want to badmouth the project, but they did start with writing their own cryptographic primitives, which is sort of violating rule number 1 of cryptography. Don't write your own primitives. You use, things that have been out there in the space. There's also a lot of vulnerabilities to IOTA. You can take the network down if you can figure out the leader and you can DDoS it. As an economy-based system, it can't be asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant like Hashgraph could. So if security matters, if guaranteed consensus matters, you'd still use the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. Is there a place for it? Is there a place in the ecosystem for it? Absolutely. If you need something that determines the logic behind pressing a button on your phone and turning a light bulb on, there's probably a benefit to something in a supply chain-like environment like IOTA, where there isn't a transaction fee, where they say it's consensus for free. Hashgraph is consensus for next to free. As Tom mentioned, it would be a millionth of a penny to actually do a microtransaction. But if you value security, I'd still say that Hashgraph is a superior technology from that standpoint.
One more question? Okay, I think we're to 8:30. Yeah, one more, last one. And then we'll have some drinks and some food.
Better be a good one.
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure.
I'm trying to be pragmatic. Hi, I'm Dennis Adamo. I'm from Celestial Technologies. We're launching a monetization platform for XR content like VR, MR, AR, which is a huge monetization problem right now. So we're building a platform that's going to have both a transactional token as well as a generator token. So the generator will generate ERC20 tokens. Are you saying that I'd be able to then connect those ERC20 tokens, because we're petrified of the microtransactions in capacity of, say, Ethereum network to bog us down? So in other words, would I be able to actually implement Hashgraph on that basis?
That's exactly right. One of the things with the public ledger will be an Ethereum virtual machine. It's a claim we're very comfortable making that will compile a Solidity application, and you will be able to use your utility token as a utility token in an application built in Solidity but running on the Hashgraph consensus mechanism. Again, we're replacing the very bottom of the stack, being this is not proof of work. It's not a leader-based system. It's the Hashgraph consensus mechanism in your application.
Okay. So then, in other words, we don't have to wait for confirmations, just one confirmation per transaction.
Well, that's exactly right. And when you're talking about confirmations, you're never truly certain that consensus has been achieved. You become more certain with every additional confirmation. Hashgraph consensus is guaranteed consensus.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Jordan and Thomas, thank you very much. We'll all be circulating in the back if you want to ask some more questions. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, Reed Smith, and thank you, Olympus Labs.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate that. That was great. Great question.